Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
The economy in turmoil. Global concerns send stocks on a wild ride, while California comes up short in expected revenues. Bank of America shares down sharply as it struggles to recover from the foreclosure crisis. The real estate market continues to limp along. And Apple's valuation keeps rising. Coming up next. Good evening, I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me for tonight's discussion on the economy are Ian Sherr, technology reporter for Dow Jones Newswires; Carolyn Said, staff writer for the San Francisco Chronicle; and Mark Calvey, reporter for the San Francisco Business Times; and John Myers, Sacramento bureau chief for KQED Public Radio, joining us from the Capitol. With instability in the national and global economies, California's tax revenues are falling short of expectations, which means the new state budget may already be in jeopardy. John, does the volatility that we see in the stock market this week make California's budget more vulnerable?
I think it does, Belva. I mean, you know, there's an old saying that we've all heard that as California goes, so goes the nation. I actually would revise that this week to say as Wall Street goes, so goes California. When things are great in the market, California revenues are great. When things are bad, the revenues can be very shaky. We have a very progressive tax structure with our personal income taxes. We rely on the most wealthy. The most wealthy get their money from capital gains. And I think a lot of people were worried this week. It's very early, of course, but they were worried this week with all of that volatility, especially if it starts to go down, that the revenue forecasts are not going to be good. And it was one of a series of worrisome signs out there this week about that California budget. I think a lot of people here in Sacramento, as the legislature comes back to work next week, are going to feel that the structure of this budget is a lot shakier than it was than when Governor Brown signed it on June 30th.
And John, are the state's finances even in more jeopardy because Washington isn't there with a stimulus package or government handout to really kind of bolster the state's financial situation?
Well, I think a lot of people have been saying, and frankly, they've been saying it for a few years, that what California needs is a second stimulus. And Governor Brown said it in a televised interview last weekend with CNN. He thinks California and the nation needs a second stimulus. But I think a lot of the concerns outside of the Wall Street concern are internal right now. I mean, the state's economy is either struggling or not quite recovering as fast as we wanted. We got an early look at some tax receipts this week from the state controller that showed that we were about $500 million below the mark. We heard later that it may not be that bad because some money might not have been counted yet. But those are economic pressures, and then they're internal budget pressures in California. We've got a lawsuit that's now in front of the state Supreme Court about the governor's plan to move money out of redevelopment agencies. We've got ballot referendums out there in circulation that could throw some of the other revenues out the door. And as I said, it's a very shaky time for a state that's already gone through a whole lot of cutting that people could think, you know, we could have a lot more cutting.
John, Brown had said that they wouldn't go to voters for additional revenue until November 2012. Now, with the budget gap widening, is there a chance that they'll reverse course and decide to go for a special election? You
know, I think it's always possible, but I think that it's unlikely. I mean, first of all, the governor was not able to get a special election this past year because he needed Republicans to help put those measures on a special election ballot. The Republicans didn't want to put those revenues then. I don't know why they'd want to do them now. And I think if the governor wanted to do something early, he pretty much sealed his fate that he couldn't do that a few weeks ago. You may remember he signed the law that canceled the February 2012 statewide election, which was a presidential primary. If he really wanted to go to the voters early, he would have tried to put something on that February ballot. We don't have a February February election now, so the earliest election there is June. I think the governor still thinks that a revenue issue would happen in November. But, you know, really, honestly, I think a lot of bets are going to be off here in the next few weeks. I think we're really going to be watching those economic numbers from back east and obviously around the country. And we're going to be watching this California recovery, too. Sales taxes, income taxes, corporate taxes, real estate market. All of these things contribute to how much revenue we have to spend on all the programs that we care about.
Go back, John, to the whole business of the redevelopment money. The courts are involved in that. Is that a question mark anyway?
Well, you know, I think it's a legal question about what's in the state constitution. This is one of those only in California kind of things, because you'll remember, Belva, that last November, voters passed a measure that made it harder to take money from local government, Prop 22. Well, the heart of this lawsuit, which is now in front of the state Supreme Court, is that the legislature could not take these local dollars, these property tax dollars, from redevelopment agencies. State Supreme Court's going to have to rule on that this week. They put a freeze, a suspension on both the state collecting the money and the redevelopment agencies from spending their money until they hear this case out later in the fall, maybe make a ruling as early as January. But that's $1.7 billion of the budget solution. If that money went away, you know, 1.7 is very hard to get. And I should point out to people, if I could really quickly, that this budget is unique because it has these budget triggers in it. And these trigger mechanisms, if revenues are short in December, we start cutting automatically more. We cut more from UC, from Cal State, subsidized child care, health care for the poor. Those are cuts on top of the cuts we already have. So this is a really interesting and difficult time to watch those numbers.
The other thing is that we now have a commission in Washington that's going to have some automatic triggers unless they meet certain benchmarks. I mean, this looks pretty like a lot of risk here over automatically having these clauses built into these measures.
Yeah, I got to tell you, the one thing that I have found interesting as a reporter who covers Sacramento and the State House is how much Washington has looked like Sacramento in the last few weeks. The partisan fighting, the gridlock, the inability to have a compromise. And so you've got this super committee that you talked about, right, that now is going to have, I guess, a lot of say-so, a lot of power over what the federal government spends. You can absolutely bet that Californians are going to be watching that closely. We do have a member on that commission, Congressman Xavier Becerra from Southern California. But, you know, California really needs federal help. I mean, you know, this has been a very big thing for us. The budget is predicated on certain dollars that come from the federal government. If the feds decide they can't spend that money, then we are also back at the negotiating table here over what to do.
Well, John, thank you for this warning message tonight from both Sacramento as well as from the nation's capital. Bank of America, the largest bank in the Bay Area, was already struggling to recover from the missteps in the foreclosure crisis. Early this week, its stock dropped 20%. So, Mark Calvey, explain what happened at Bank of America.
They took on Countrywide, which was really one of the most aggressive lenders during the historic housing bubble. And so they've taken on all those problems without any government protection like Chase buying Washington Mutual. They enjoyed substantial protection in that deal. B of A doesn't enjoy that protection. So they're facing now all the foreclosures, bad loans, and then investors suing the bank saying the securities that are backing the mortgage-backed securities are faulty. We want reimbursement. AIG was the latest to sue on Monday, wanting more than $10 billion from B of A. So the troubles are mounting at the bank.
Was this, so you said that Bank of America moved in without safeguards.
Exactly.
Why do you think that?
I think they were very optimistic. Maybe we all were during the housing bubble. I think they were optimistic they could contain the damage in Countrywide. They had a long-running relationship with the government. They bought several troubled institutions over the past two decades. And so I think they were more optimistic than they should have been. Since then, even the bank officials say we regret the purchase. Barbara DeSore, president of Bank of America Home Loans, told me this month that if we had not bought Countrywide, B of A would look like a model bank, a role model for others. I think 81% of their delinquent mortgages are all originated from Countrywide, so it's been a real burden for them to clean up. There's been even talk today, talk was intensifying, there could be some type of federal bailout, something for the government to come in and help them.
Mark, I wonder if they do get a bailout, Right now, I hear all the time from troubled homeowners who call me and say they can't get a loan modification. And in their mind, they say all the big banks took bailout money in 2008, 2009, and why aren't they helping us since they took the money from the government? Why aren't they turning around and helping the taxpayers? But there were no strings attached to those bailouts. If there's a bailout this time around, is there a chance that there would be some strings attached that would require B of A to help the troubled countrywide borrowers who are in over their heads and are facing losing their homes?
Definitely. It's all speculation at this point, but there's a feeling that there will be no blank check without any strings, that it would be a help for B of A would be tied to helping out the troubled borrowers and really try to get to the heart of the foreclosure crisis. So I don't think anyone's expecting blank checks to be issued from Washington as they did 3 years ago during the depths of that portion of the crisis.
And if there is a bailout, when would that happen?
Well, my feeling is if there is a bailout, and I think it's more a case of when, not if, that it'll occur before the Democrats meet in Charlotte, Bank of America's hometown, next year for their Democratic National Convention. I think they want to have this issue behind them before they meet for that convention. So
Can that happen with the Republican majority that's
it's
there
hard
now?
it is hard to believe, but the public is angry, and I think Washington's hearing that public anger. I don't support violence, of course, but when I wrote about Countrywide regretting it, B of A regretting the Countrywide purchase, 2 of the first 3 people reading that story and posting comments wanted CEO shot. That's just a sign of how angry the public is. So I think that the message will get through to Washington. The closer we get to the presidential election, I think the find or the hearing will be in Washington to the pleas for help.
It all seems to be coming together. It's like a Shakespearean play almost.
Absolutely. It is just so ironic. And when they tapped Charlotte for the Democratic convention, I thought, oh, I mean, you just couldn't set this up better as a piece of fiction. You know, the truth is better than fiction at times.
And the hope for those Countrywide clients who felt that the paperwork done by the bank to take their homes away, what's happened with that?
Well, they've resumed the foreclosures, but the states are still negotiating with the banks on how to settle the foreclosure paperwork issues and all of that. And there's now talk, B of A has actually said, maybe we need to waive principal, which I think starts getting to the heart of the problem, reducing the loan balances so they're more manageable and these homeowners aren't underwater. So I think behind the scenes there's a lot of talk and progress being made to provide some real help for troubled borrowers.
So there could be something of a silver lining for some, this added trouble that the bank is seeing now?
I think so, because if they need the government's help, I know they're going to listen to the public and want to have some type of help directed to the individual borrowers, which was really at the heart of the bank's problems, is that people weren't paying their mortgages. And so maybe there will be help for that individual taxpayer, that troubled borrower, in addition to helping the bank. As I tell my editors, as Bank of America goes, so goes the nation. And so I think we have to watch B of A very carefully.
I was going to ask you any impact for other banks, but...
Well, they're already talking. If there's a bailout for B of A, don't be surprised to see Wells Fargo, Chase, and the other major lenders also getting some assistance.
Okay, Mark. Well, turning now to the local real estate market. Rents are rising, but home values continue to fall, with nearly 23% of Bay Area homeowners owing more on the mortgage than their houses are worth. Carolyn Said, is the real estate market dragging down the economy, or is it vice versa?
They really are locked in a chicken and egg syndrome. I would say as long as the economy stays weak, the real estate market cannot recover, because when people lose their jobs, and as we're seeing now, job loss is an extended thing that happens, people stay unemployed for 2 years, they sadly often end up losing their house because so as we just said, 1/4 of Bay Area homes are underwater. Nationwide, the figure is even higher. If your home is underwater and you have some kind of financial shock, a job loss, a divorce, an illness, some other, dramatic, unexpected thing, which many people are having, you don't have any safety valve. You can't refinance your house, you can't take out home equity, and you can't sell it for enough to pay off the mortgage. And so all too often what happens is people lose their house to foreclosure. As long as we continue having foreclosures come on the market, prices will stay depressed. The good news, such as it is that we no longer are having the dramatic free fall in real estate values that we were having a couple of years ago. Things are sort of bumping along the bottom, but they could easily stay bumping along the bottom for 2, even 3 years, because, again, it's sluggish on both ends. Either, if real estate revved up, that would be an engine for driving the economy. We'd have more jobs in construction and finance and, Home Depot, all kinds of things related to people buying and building homes would help drive the economy. I don't see that happening. So I think the solution actually has to come from the economy, creating jobs in other sectors. And, then that rising tide could lift all boats and make people able to keep their homes because they have an income.
I mentioned at the beginning of this segment that rental prices were going up in San Francisco, which seems, if there's all this real estate out there, why is San Francisco different in this?
Well, for one thing, San Francisco has always been a city of renters. San Francisco only has about a third of its population as homeowners. Nationwide, it's 2/3 of the population as homeowners. We're having so many young tech workers sort of flood the city, and they're looking for rentals, and so there is more demand than inventory, and so starting prices for apartments are going up and inventory is low. And the same thing is true in San Jose, because both San Francisco and San Jose are actually pretty decent job centers in some ways right now, and there is a lot happening on rentals. And then the other thing is, a lot of people have soured on home ownership. Either they don't believe in it anymore because they saw, that how a home can go up, but can also go down, or they just can't do it. They don't have the income, they don't have the credit, they don't have the down payment. So more people are trending toward renting. Even Uncle Sam is thinking of becoming a landlord. The government this week said that they want to take 100,000 foreclosed homes that are owned by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and FHA, and possibly several 100,000 more that are in the pipeline in delinquency, and they're looking for ideas on how to turn those into rentals. They would partner with private investors to manage those homes and rent them out. And the idea is it would help stabilize neighborhoods, because it doesn't do anybody any good to have a home be vacant and have multiple foreclosures. People come in and vandalize them, they squat in them, it brings down a neighborhood. And also, we still have the same number of the people who all lost their home to foreclosure. They still need a place to live. So
Are we seeing a permanent souring on home ownership, which was a hallmark of the American dream and everything? Is this a permanent change in the attitude?
Well, it's hard to say if it's permanent. I mean, Americans kind of flit around with their opinions, but there has been a significant change. At the peak of the real estate bubble, or just before the peak in about 2004, we had a 69% home ownership rate in this country, which I think is the highest ever, and now it's down to 66%. That's a pretty significant drop, 3% of the population there. So, and I do think maybe, younger people, Gen X, Gen Y, millennials, don't have the same attachment to home ownership that their parents, who were the children of Depression era people did. It did used to be part of the American dream that you needed to own your own home, and that's how you built wealth. But people have seen that, you don't always build wealth. Sometimes you lose wealth by owning a home.
So what do you think would take to kind of turn that around and change their perspective and mine as well?
Well, I don't know. It's not always the best thing for people to own a home is the reality. I mean, I think that there is something to be said for people no longer blindly thinking that, just get a home at any cost and it's always going to go up in value. On the other hand, there are some fundamentals now that you would think would be supporting home ownership. Interest rates are incredibly low. I mean, they're hovering around 4.25%. And homes now are more affordable than they've been because of this free fall. And yet people are not really buying that much. Again, I think they're scared, or else they don't have the jobs, the credit, or the down payment. So, yeah, we could be shifting. I mean, again, I've said many times, in Europe, most people live in apartments all their lives, and they're perfectly happy, and they don't feel like they're deprived or second-class citizens because they don't own a home.
Well, if we're on the lookout for, you sort of had a moderately good news story tonight. If we're on the lookout for good news, what are some of the indicators that we might look for? What could happen? We've got low interest rates. Mm-hmm. We've got a lot of supply. So what are we, other than jobs, I guess?
Well, foreclosures slowing down would be a really good indicator. And in fact, they are slowing down, but we're not sure if at core that's because things are better, or if it's just because the banks had to slow down because of the robo-signing controversy, so they had to redo their systems and do foreclosures more slowly and more carefully. But really, we need to stop having people lose their homes, and then because the foreclosures pouring onto the market keep depressing everything. So that's what we could look for. If we consistently have foreclosures slow down to a trickle instead of they've been a fire hose these past few years, I think that would start things to be able to start coming back up again.
Well,
So.
this is a record night. Got you and Mark here both, and you have moderately good news stories. Thanks, Carolyn. Well, there was some good news this week for Apple. This week, Apple briefly surpassed Exxon Mobile as the most valued company. So, Ian Sherr, why is Apple's value significant?
Well, primarily what it says is what investors think about Apple, where they think its growth prospects are. Apple doesn't give out dividends or buy back shares very much. So really what they believe is that there's value in the stock rising. They believe that over time it will rise in value. And so more people are piling into it, raising its value. And so thus we have it rising above Exxon Mobile. Also, ExxonMobil's value lowered because a lot of the gyrations in the market, so it's kind of a backing into first place type of thing as well. But this is largely symbolic anyway. A company's valuation, if you will, the value that investors put on it doesn't mean very much about how the company's doing, what the prospects of it are, for the future. It's what they believe about the company. Apple is going gangbusters right now. A couple weeks ago, they reported record earnings. It's been a very, very good couple of years for them. But that doesn't indicate that, things are going to be perfect going forward either.
So if you're an oil company and a tech company for even a day moves ahead of you in value, is there any long-term indication we can get from that?
It's hard to say. We all are still using oil, so that's a guarantee right there. But with tech, Apple seems to have become kind of a force unto itself. One of the things I wrote about in the journal just today was about how most of the tablet makers are having a hard time selling their tablets. There's a lot of supply out there. They haven't really been able to work out how much demand there is, so there's a lot of stuff sitting on retail shelves. What we do know is, one analyst said, there's the iPad market and then there's everyone else. And it doesn't seem that the two are together. HP even slashed the price of their HP touchpad over the week. So it's been a very hard time to tell that tech is doing really well. And you've got companies like Facebook and Zynga who seem to be doing very well, but that is not the majority of tech. So it's kind of not too sure whether or not it's just Apple or if it's the entire industry.
Yeah. And Ian, I wonder, going back to our earlier discussion, so Apple is doing fabulously well. Well, what's in it for California?
Yeah.
I mean, so they have a big workforce here in Cupertino, and they have the stores across the country. They manufacture overseas. Are they creating enough jobs to help California, or is it just kind of par for the course?
It's really hard to say. I mean, they are creating jobs. They are growing. They're actually building a new headquarters in Cupertino, which Cupertino, of course, will get tax revenue and whatnot from that. So there's value there. They say they're bursting at the seams and they're growing their workforce that way. But it's not dramatic growth either, right? Most of it is really, it's taxes that come from selling iPads and iPhones, which a lot of us are buying them, but it's not enough to bolster the entire economy. So it's hard to say.
At one time, there was the illusion that Apple's fate and Steve Jobs' fate were just one thing. We've gotten used to the fact that he has health problems, but yet the company seems to just be booming.
Yeah, it's kind of there are different perspectives, and the perspectives tend to follow how the stock is doing. So when the stock's having a bad time, people say, oh, well, this is the Steve Jobs premium having an impact. And when the stock is doing well, they say, oh, well, Steve Jobs isn't part of the stock anymore. I think that at the end of the day, we're going to find that out when and if Steve Jobs, well, eventually when Steve Jobs is no longer a part of Apple. And the sense in the market more and more is that it's the foregone conclusion that he will not be there in the semi-moderate term future. But really, it's unsure. And if they announced it tomorrow, nobody knows what really would happen. There is a sense that still a lot of the innovation at Apple happens around Steve Jobs. And so there is concern still whether or not that innovation will be there when and if he's gone. And but Apple has put a lot of effort into kind of teaching us, if you will, that there are people other than Steve Jobs. They put a lot more people on stage when there's announcements now, and it's kind of it's a way of telling us, hey, this is not just a one-person company. So I think they're getting that message across sometimes.
And yet Microsoft was once the hot tech stock, and we see where they are today. Is there any feel like, let's rein in expectations?
There's definitely that concern. If you look at I don't believe there's a single analyst who has anything but a buy rating on the stock with a couple of exclamation points on it. But it's certainly something that it's hard to see. right? I don't think many people, if you went back 10, 15 years ago, would have said Microsoft would be essentially flat for the 10 years. That's pretty hard. To be fair, they're still selling Windows like mad, but it's really hard to tell what the future of tech is, and especially for a company like Apple, which is consumer-oriented, right? When it comes to that, consumers vote with their wallets. It's not like they're with big corporations, IT departments who are buying from them regularly, and they have contracts going for years and years and years. It's a consumer-facing companies. If consumers choose tomorrow that Apple stuff is not worth it, if the iPhone falls out of favor, that's it. Then they need to look somewhere else for growth.
But you say they're always innovating.
They are always innovating, and so far they've been innovating in a way that consumers enjoy.
Well, my thanks to all of you for joining me here tonight. Please visit kqed.org/thisweek to watch past episodes and much more. Also, KQED's News wants to hear from you. We're seeking reflections on the legacy of 9/11. And we want to know what San Francisco residents want from their next mayor. That's all on our website. We close with images of the Pacific Voyager, a fleet of sailing canoes from Polynesia. They were in the Bay Area this week to draw attention to the impact of global warming and pollution on the ocean. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.